Sign the card.
Huh?
Sign the card.
Okay.
Who am I signing for?
Donna.
Oh, Donna. Oh,
That's what I said, Donna. Pay
Yeah, I
attention to
signed
me.
it.
I don't listen to you.
I signed it.
I listen to her.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and get started here.
I think I haven't asked her lately.
Okay, so,
I have 3.
okay, so online we got, online, yep, so online we got Gail and Avon, and we got Chris, and I assume Chris, Linda's there with you. Okay, so in person, we got Audrey, we got Jan, we got Anna, we got Pauline, we got Steve, we got Joe, we got Beth. Hello, Beth. We got Joan. There we go. All right.
Wins. Wins.
So,
Wins. We're wins.
let's go ahead and how about we start off with the word of prayer here. How about we go ahead and we start off with a word of prayer. Beth, could you open us up with a word of prayer, please?
Oh, God, Beth.
Okay.
Oh.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the beautiful day that we had today, for allowing Awanas to get together, for allowing us to get together to learn more about your word. Give Jeff the words of your wisdom and be with us all now. We pray this in your precious name. Amen.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So, we are now going to be studying about Daniel, and this study of Daniel is going to take us through October and through November, just so you know. Okay? So, and then I don't know what your preferences are. I'm going to throw something out there just for you to think about, and then if you could just get back to me either one-on-one or you could tell me later here. But, you know, whether or not you wanted to do some sort of study during Advent, special study focused, you know, for the Advent season and Christmas. Or whether you just want to have that Wednesday night off and not worry about it since you got other things going on. You know, so I just want to think about it. Let me know what you want to do. Either way, this study of Daniel will be done in the last Wednesday in November. Okay, just so everyone knows. Yeah.
I make a motion that we take that Wednesday off.
Well, if that's what you want, just, yeah, okay, so I know you want that. Others can just let me know whatever they want and we'll just go with that then. Okay, so this book of Daniel is very, it's a very unique book in the Bible. In some forms of Judaism, they don't include it in their canon. It's disputed in terms of its authenticity, its accuracy. It is the only book that's written in multiple languages. So some chapters of it are in ancient Hebrew, and then other chapters were written in Aramaic. And Aramaic is a Hebrew language from much later, from the time of Christ. There was an early form of Aramaic about 100 years before Christ, but Aramaic was actually the dominant language in the region during the time of Christ. So that causes people, and then there's actually other parts of it that are written in Babylonian, in a Sumerian language, and different phrases. So there's these multiple portions, and in the manuscripts, this causes the most kind of consternation because none of the early manuscripts are just in one language. The earliest manuscripts, those in the Dead Sea Scrolls, have multiple languages throughout, which then also causes problems in dating some of the manuscripts because, for example, it'd be like if you found a document, the comparison would be, let's say you find a document and the first parts of it are written in Old English like the Puritans would use back in colonial days. You know, where all the S's look like F's and everything, and it has that same word order. And then all of a sudden, other parts of it are written in English that maybe was about 100 years old and from the 1890s and stuff. And it's in the modern tech, modern formation and everything. And then you say to yourself, okay, well, how old is this text? What's authentic in the text and what's not authentic in the text? And it causes and it raises all these kind of questions and still does today. And it causes it to be debated. It also varies in types of form. 1 through 7 are all narrative and historical in form, while chapters 8 through 12 are in poetry. And so you got different languages, different literary styles, and it just causes all sorts of debates about it. It is there's no personal pronouns in it. So it's written, the main character obviously is Daniel, but it's not written in the sense that Daniel's writing about himself and saying, here's what's happened. It's more as if someone is writing about Daniel. And that causes then who's actually the author of it. And so when looking to the author, a lot of people kind of point to Ezekiel or Ezra. And that there were these stories of Daniel, and they gathered them together and put them into a single book.
Okay.
But we really don't know. When you get right down to it, we don't know who the specific author is.
So the pieces that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls are
Right.
written in different languages.
Yes.
Those are the earliest ones, and they're in different languages.
Yes.
Okay. Right. But Daniel is a historical person, though.
Daniel is a
I mean,
historical.
he's not like somebody they made up. There's actual evidence that he was.
There's archaeological evidence for Daniel that he exists. There was an official called Belteshazzar who was a Jew who had been taken in captivity that never returned to the exile, and that this individual lasted not just through the Babylonian time period, but also the Persian. So we know Daniel is definitely a historical person.
Right.
We know the people they're talking about are historical. What is debated often is, where does Daniel fit in? What's the real text, and how do we determine what the real text is? And this is the thing that causes a lot of consternation and difficulty, because so much of what's in Daniel connects, as we had seen in Revelation, to Revelation. And so there are interconnections that are there, which then lead some to say, well, regardless, we know it's the inspiration of God because it's all interconnected. And since it's all interconnected, that kind of proves that God's handiwork. And we know by the dating of the earliest manuscripts, it wasn't something that later Christians did just to make it fit. So by saying the authorship's disputed, by saying there's these peculiarities in the manuscript, is not for the sake of casting doubt upon the text, if that makes sense, because somehow it does nicely fit in there, but it does cause concerns and it raised doubt. And it's why in the Jewish faith, you'll see many Jews totally doubt Daniel, and they don't include it at all. And if you bring up Daniel to some Jewish friends, they'll be like, "Oh," you know, like you're talking some crazed conspiracy.
Well, ask your brother-in-law that.
He's not a Jew.
And as we go along too, hey, as we go along, you're gonna see very peculiar things in Daniel. And I'm not talking about the miracles, but peculiar things that you really have to kind of think about and pray on why, you know, we're talking about it. Daniel never uses this term Yahweh, which was very common for the Jews in exile. And then to throw it off, there's several Persian words that are used in Daniel that didn't even exist during Daniel's time. Because you see, first you have the Babylonians and the Babylonian Empire. The Medo-Persians were the next ones to conquer, and then the Medos collapse and it's just the Persians. And then the Greeks come on down with Alexander the Greek. So he's using words, or certain words are used in Daniel that don't exist until about 100 some years after Daniel. Which is another thing that causes heads to scratch.
Was he a time traveler?
Hey, yeah, well, yeah, believe it or not, you got some people that do time. But that's too far out there. And the theology in Daniel is very developed and refined, more so than it was at the time. And also, all of these things causes people to put doubt on the prophecies, but the thing is that the prophecies do neatly fit in. So, I'm just laying this out for you. Some of the criticisms that you'll hear about Daniel is they'll say, oh, because of all these things, it was written much later. And so it's basically saying, oh, Daniel had this prophecy, and you see how neatly it fell into place with things that already happened. In other words, the criticism, people who are critical of Daniel, Bible scholars who are critical of Daniel, say all those prophecies were written after the fact, to say, see it occur. Now the problem with that, and that was a big criticism that was going on during the 1890s and the 1900s through the 1920s and 30s here in this, there's a group called historical critics of the Bible, and it was a big deal to criticize the Bible and that and do textual criticism. And that was their, well, the problem is the Dead Sea Scrolls kind of lay that to waste. Because the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest one that we have, is back to 250 BC. And so if you got something that's written around 250 BC and it has these prophecies, then okay, yeah, that would have been okay for the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian Empire, and even the Greeks, but the Romans weren't there yet. So it wouldn't have, and that's prophesying to that. So that throws all that type of criticism out there, but you will still see that criticism today. And I'm just bringing it out, but it throws it out by just the Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts. Okay, so now Babylon is the Sumerian word, and the Babylon that we think of is actually a Hebrew word. It comes from Baal, and it's meaning this gate of God of the earth. And so the Babylonian people who were this mixture of races, and all their initial complements in government, humanities, sciences, and technology, it's what advances them. And even though it appears like they're pretty mean, they're actually very humane in comparison to the other groups at the time. I mean, it's 3 times before Nebuchadnezzar wipes Jerusalem out. He gives them 3 chances. And then he finally comes in and does. And the fact that he takes captives and he assimilates them and brings them in instead of just killing everybody, which the ancient Assyrians used to do. And so they really become the capital of civilization at the time, and they have advancements in all the different areas that we can think of law and science and everything. And the beginnings of the whole thing, of this whole Babylonian Empire, you might have heard of it before, Hammurabi. And you ever hear of Hammurabi's codes?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so historically, Hammurabi is the first set of legal codes that we have that are written down for people. And they were discovered, and it's like, ooh, archaeologically we discovered them, and here they write them all down. And the interesting thing is it sets up a code of laws. Instead of the laws just being something that's fickle and based on the king's discretion, it's actually a way of making law and a code of laws that applies to everybody. And that's a big deal. And Hammurabi, when he exists, there's all these other things, the Hittites, the Assyrians, and what happens is the Assyrian Empire collapses, and then the Babylonians begin to expand their empire. And so I give you just a little bit of a historical background just for your use there of how it develops and how it begins to grow. And so our Nebuchadnezzar that we have is this Nebuchadnezzar II. And that's the Nebuchadnezzar we have in the Bible, and that children everywhere grow to know and love.
I just like to say the name.
Yes, yeah, but there's how the names actually spell if you phonetically pull it out. And he ends up conquering all the Jews. He brings them into exile. He conquers that region. He goes on into Egypt, and he conquers a good portion of Egypt also. And he conquers up through to what's Lebanon. And then his advancement and his conquering ends going up into what is Turkey and what will become the Greek area. So anyway, he also is the one who made one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the beautiful Hanging Gardens. Isn't that nice?
Never there.
That's what crazy people could do, right?
Well, he wasn't crazy. He does have a moment, we'll see, where he goes a little bonkers, but he wasn't crazy, and he actually becomes one of the few ancient kings that becomes a person that advocates God, the one true God.
Do they still have the Hanging Gardens?
No, but there's archaeological evidence of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wondered if those flowers and things like that would.
They actually have uncovered where things have become fossilized. Things, and there was one thing I read in biblical archaeology where they found a whole storage of seeds Cause he just didn't, he had his flowers, but he also, had seeds, and he had, where they did experiments trying to make different things and stuff, and they found this whole area of seeds, and they were trying to, there was some seeing if they couldn't extract DNA nowadays and recreate the plants or flowers from the ancient times, just to see what they were.
Don't know if you don't try it.
Yeah, I haven't read of any success.
Yeah.
Just the old speculation of it. So anyway, Daniel is gonna be alive through Nebuchadnezzar's reign and through the rest of these Babylonian kings. And what will happen then is eventually the Persians take over Babylon. And he lives through that takeover by the Persians. So now, you see in your, did you have something, Chris?
No, I just had a picture.
You had a picture?
Well, it's a picture of what they think the hanging gardens look like.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can see that, but okay. Gail and Alvin can.
Yeah.
But thanks. Yeah, you can Google these things and look them up and be easily found. So on the third page there, if you look at the third page, what you see is the exiles of the Jews. Okay, and the path they would take for the exiles. You wouldn't go straight across the Arabian desert, well, because it's the Arabian desert, and you die. There ain't nothing there. Literally nothing there. And so this is the route they would take in order to get to Babylon. Now there were 3 exiles that occurred. Daniel leaves in the first. He's a small kid. He's part of the royal household. And he's taken captive in the first and taken to Babylon.
There's Aleppo.
I'm sorry, Chris?
I just noticed on the map, the city of Aleppo, which was in the news a year or 2 ago with all that fighting that was going on.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yep. With ISIS and the whole Syrian civil war that's still going on up there. Yeah. So anyway, this captivity we read in the very beginning. And now we go to, is there any questions about this kind of like intro of Daniel? Anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts? Just primarily to try to give you a background. Did you have, what? Oh, no? Okay. All right. So, let's go ahead and return to Daniel. Gotta get to it. I thought I had it there and I went and changed everything on myself. Why'd I do that?
See, if you have kids, well, you can blame it on them.
Yeah.
Did I have what?
If you have kids, you can blame it on them.
Yeah, I know. If I had kids, I could blame it on, but I can't.
Cats do it.
Cat, yeah, not even
Cats did it,
cats.
yeah. No, it was just me. I changed all my bookmarks for the time of prayer. So, okay. So here we are in chapter 1 of Daniel. Okay? And I don't know, would someone please just read the first 2 verses in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2?
In the 3rd year reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it,
And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, with some of his articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God.
Okay. So that gives us the historical context of Daniel and context with everything. So this king of Judah, what ends up happening with him is this siege isn't that big of a deal. Basically, he comes down the siege, and this king says, "I give up." And so they don't totally conquer and take everything, and what he does is he takes some of the stuff from the temple and he gives it to him as money, and then he also takes a bunch of people and he gives it to the king as captives, and then what happens is the king replaces him with someone else and puts that person in his stead and takes him into captivity, and then says, "Here you go. You're now a vassal state. You just have to continue to pay taxes to us. I won't destroy your city, won't destroy everything. You just pay taxes to us, and it's all good. And you're a part of Babylon." And that's the way they did things back then. The conquering and total, and that was one of the civilized things of Babylon. The conquering and total destruction only came if you resisted them. But if you surrendered unto them and just gave in, it was fine. So this is when now Daniel leaves, and he goes into captivity. Okay? So now, let's go from there. Yeah, 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar's going to come back and has to deal with them because they stopped paying them. And then he puts someone else into place. He takes a few more captive, and then what happens is that the third king that he puts him in, the final king of Judah, says, "I don't have to pay any taxes," and doesn't do it. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar comes and wipes everything out and totally destroys it. And that's at Jeremiah, where we have Jeremiah and everything like that. So, here we go. We go into that deportation, and now we get this servant. He becomes a servant to the king. So, I don't know, would someone please read verses 3 through 6? Or 3 through 7. I'm sorry, 3 through 7.
Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego.
Okay. So now, when they're kind of getting assessed, you got to understand that Daniel and these others, they're of royalty. They're of the royal family. Okay? So for some Bible scholars emphasize the idea that Daniel's of the line of David, of this royal descent that was going on. And you can imagine, just like around here, how everyone's interrelated. You know, there's lots, by the time you've gone several hundred years, there's a lot of people interrelated to each other, and families are mixed up, but somehow they're part of the royal family and they were part of the royal household. And they are also without any kind of defect. Kids back then, if they had a defect, were lucky if they survived. In Romans times, they would just bump them off. And in Israel, in Judah's and Israel time, one of the things they were criticized for was their sacrifice of kids to the god Moloch. And a lot of times they would sacrifice kids that had defect and just throw them away.
Yeah, because most sacrifices were supposed to be, well, the Jewish sacrifice.
Jewish
without
sacrifice,
blemish.
yeah. Moloch was just
He
give
took
me a
anything.
kid. Yeah, he took anything. And this was a way of getting rid of kids with defects of any kind. So, and it was always important in the royal household that kids never had any defects, that they were perfect. So that's one part right there. And then this idea of them being endowed with wisdom and knowledge. In Babylon, we know from their texts that their language was Aramaic and Sumerian, and they also had a form of writing. So these kids would have been tested in all those things. They would have been tested in all their different areas of knowledge and academic disciplines. Yeah.
But you just said before that Aramaic wasn't used. Aramaic wasn't used.
Not the type of Aramaic. Aramaic comes from Sumerian, Sumeria, and it's a mixture of Hebrew and Sumerian language, and it developed in that area. So it wasn't a full Aramaic, but it was a type of Aramaic, kind of like ancient Aramaic. You always got to think of languages as having periods of development that go over hundreds of years. They just don't appear magically one day, type of thing. So, yeah.
My version says the language of the Chaldeans.
Pardon me?
My version says the language of the Chaldeans.
Yeah, and the language of the Chaldeans, though, this is what it meant.
Okay.
And the Chaldeans were the Babylonians.
Okay.
At the time. And so that's why I put in there, when it says language, this is what it's talking about. It's talking, we think when we say language, we're just talking about English. If you were to go to Europe, say you were to go to Germany or France, and say the language of Europe or anything like that, well, they're schooled in German, they're schooled in French, they're schooled in English, they're schooled in Spanish. They have an sundry. And so when they're talking the language of the Chaldeans, it's this broad spectrum. It's not a singular language, and you can't think of it in singular language. And that was one of the things this was the center of civilization. And they had writing, which was a really big deal. For all their government documents and everything like that, which archaeologically helps us. But they had all these academic disciplines too: mathematics, biology, medicine, astronomy, engineering, geography, history, music, art, the whole line. And by a discipline, I mean they actually had, it wasn't just a thing, Uncle Fred went and he drew little pictures here and there or something like that. They actually had places where they studied art and how to do it. And people apprenticing in art and in making statues and in doing those things, which Judah didn't have at that time.
Well, because you couldn't make an idol. Well, because Judah didn't believe in idol making, so who are you gonna make?
Well, but they did have lots of idols
Well,
and
that's
stuff.
true.
Yeah. Remember, they weren't good kings back then. That's the whole reason the Babylonians conquered them. They were doing bad stuff. But they didn't have it as a discipline, as a field of knowledge to be studied. It was just, oh, we got a statue to make. Hey, yeah, Fred's pretty good with stone carving there. Go get Fred to make the stone statue for us.
It's Fred Flintstone got this.
Yeah, Fred Flintstone, right, yeah, there you go.
Quarry worker.
Good old Fred Flintstone. So, then we get the whole thing of their names, and the names are significant here. And what the names get changed into is significant. I lay that out for you. How Daniel is, God is my judge, and Belteshazzar is protector of life. And that's going to be significant. Keep in mind Daniel's names as you're reading Daniel, because it comes into play in the acts that Daniel does. Okay? And then Hananiah means the Lord shows grace, and Shadrach means command. And then Mishael, who is what God is, and changed to Meshach, means who is what Aku is. And Aku is a Babylonian god. And then Ezra means the Lord helps. And Abdago means the servant of Nebo, who is another Babylonian god. Okay, so all of these come into place in how they act. Okay, and things that they say as we go along. So you gotta kind of keep their names in mind as we're going through this. Okay, any questions about any of that? Okay, looking around, don't see any. Guess Linda and Chris don't have any. I like the green walls you got. That's not good paint, yeah.
Isn't that a drawing?
Yeah, their walls in their house are green. It's a greenish shade. I like that. Yeah, it's a nice dark green. I like the molding on the ceiling too. I'm sorry, Chris, could you say again?
We just had new floors put in.
Oh, you had new floors put in.
Are they green
Okay.
No.
Show us your, oh, yeah, those are nice wood there. Yeah, that's a nice wood floor.
Simulated.
Looks good.
Laminated.
Yeah,
They're
okay,
laminated.
got nice wood floors, green walls, nice little molding around the ceiling. This is Chris and Linda's house.
I can see next week you'll be painting something
Would you
green.
like the formal tour?
No, maybe later, maybe another time, but since I'm the only one that can see right here, right now, and Gail and Evan, they might like it.
It's okay.
So now, if we could, would someone please read 8 through 15? Anybody? Anyone up for reading chapter 1, 8 through 15?
But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official, for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who's assigned your food and drink. Why should he see me looking worse than the other young men your age? The king then would have my head because of you. You want 15, right? Okay. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel. I'm sure all these names. Manny Molajak. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who are eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what they see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. What, 15 read to?
15.
Yep, through 15.
At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who had eaten the royal food.
All right, so now we got kind of the first test. So the first test comes right up on the thing. And understand, they're being trained for the royal court, to be in the royal court in Babylon there. So they're getting all the best food in the land. Now, here comes one of the big questions. Okay, so why does Daniel not want to eat this good food? I mean, this is the best of the best. This is the best of the best, you know? So why doesn't he want to eat it?
It has been, presented to other gods.
Okay, you read ahead.
No.
Were you?
Honestly.
Yeah. Didn't you see? So now it is not, this is not a thing that's saying God approves vegetarianism.
Good.
This is not a theological stance and advocacy for vegetarians. Okay? This is not a stance for some sort of fad diet called the Daniel Plan, which was out there and got all sorts of traction, you know, back in the 90s and stuff like that. This was solely because this food, the king's food, was first presented to the gods, and then a part comes back. So it'd be like, Joan's the god, I give Joan the food, and then a portion stays with Joan, and then I take this rest back, and now the food is coming from Joan, the god.
The false god.
And my eating of the food is an act of worship to the god. This kind of idea of the way it worked with food will stay for over 1,000 years. I mean, Paul will be dealing with this, and we see it in 1st and 2nd Corinthians, with food being offered to the gods. And so this becomes the main reason why Daniel's gonna say, I can't eat this food, because doing it is really worshiping this God and acknowledging that being as being a legitimate God.
So
Yeah.
was that like when the Jews, the priests will get a portion of the offerings that were given to God?
See, the difference in Levitical worship was that those sacrifices, this was the best that you had, and you were offering it up to God. And then it would be a thing of thanksgiving, it could be for a thing of forgiveness, okay? There were whole lots of different series, but you were just taking the best that you had to give to God. Not that it was, and the portion that went to the priest, that the priest got, was just a way of keeping them employed, because they weren't allowed to do anything else. Basically, they weren't allowed to have a second job and earn money on the side, so that just kept them fed. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's totally different than the idea of the way these pagan religions were, where you gave all the food, 100%, then took a portion back, but that taking back was actually supposedly the God giving it to you. And then you eating it was an act of worship itself. And that's really the primary reason why Daniel is saying, hey, we can't eat of this stuff. And now think about this. So Daniel, we know, I'm assuming you all read Daniel at some point in your life? Everyone read Daniel, so you know Daniel doesn't end here, right? He goes on. So now his entire time and all the positions he has, he's in this royal group, eating the royal food. Do you think he started eating the royal food then? Or was he always just eating the dishes? Because all we talk about is 10 days here,
I think he stuck to his convictions.
okay?
Wouldn't he be driven to Jewish traditions as far as eating food was concerned? The Jewish tradition says that you can't eat strangled meat, you can't eat blood, things like that. Also, you can't eat any animal that doesn't have a split hoof, chews its own cud.
Yeah, so some of the food might have been unclean.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right, and there's a thought too, that some of it would be unclean. You know, but lots of it wouldn't be. I mean, it's not like they're eating raw meat, and he decides just to focus though on eating vegetables and things that aren't being offered. So, yeah, we got, that's one of the thoughts. Gee, so for the next, almost 90 years, this was Daniel's diet? Or did he start eating meat that was acceptable? And he just would not kind of circumvent the king's table and get stuff from the outside that wasn't offered to gods. There's a possibility too. It does raise questions. A lot of this stuff raises questions in terms of how long these things go on and what have you. So anyway, we get Daniel's test for 10 days, and if someone just read from 16 down through 21.
So the guard took away their choice of food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. You know his name.
Nebuchadnezzar.
The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel.
Yeah.
So they entered the king's service in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enhancers in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus.
Okay, and remember, King Cyrus is the first king of the Persians. Okay, so now, looking at those verses, we know Daniel and the other 3, because we're always focused on those 4, they were better than everybody else. Just after 10 days, miracle diet. Kind of like when you take these gummy bears and everything melts away in your sleep, supposedly, So they eat vegetables and miracle. Wow, they look better just in 10 days. Go. And they're so smart and bright. More intelligent than all the other bubbas around.
I'm gonna try that.
Isn't that amazing?
That 10-day experiment of Daniel's was actually the first written example of the scientific method. There was a hypothesis that eating this would produce results. You had the control group, you had the test group, and then you had the final exam, the final result. So scientific method had to begin here.
You're right. Yep, Chris, did everyone hear that? Chris saying about the scientific method? But now, Chris, in this, there is an intervening variable.
It's gone.
Yes, God's the intervening variable.
That's right. And that's the whole point. So I just put this out because people that use this thing to say, look, here's a scientific study to show just being a vegetarian works and makes you healthier, wealthier, and wise, and all sorts of great stuff. They totally missed the intervening variable where it said in verse 17, to these 4 young men God gave all the knowledge. It wasn't being a vegetarian that gave them all the knowledge. God gave it to them. God is the one that intervened. And why is God intervening and doing this for these 4?
It's got a plan.
Well, he has a plan, obviously, but why else?
Show off.
Huh?
Show off.
To show them off?
Yeah.
Well, what did they do?
Well, they had wisdom, they had knowledge, they had God.
They were loyal to God. They focused on being faithful to God. Even, and you gotta understand, so these are kids. These are kids. Some Jewish scholars say, you know, we're talking about people under 10 years of age. Some put them around teenagers. Either way, the risk of what they're doing is getting killed. Because if they show any sign of being unhealthy, the Bubba that's in charge of them will get bumped off. And they could get bumped off. But in the risk of that, they are giving themselves over faithfully to God. And that's the important part.
It lays the groundwork for later on when Daniel and the lions then about who the true God really is. It lays the groundwork for that. It's the same God who gave them the wisdom and knowledge
Right.
and kept them safe.
I mean, basically, it could have been Daniel saying, hey, we're not going to eat this because we're going to be faithful to God. Just give me bread and water. And we'll see who and it still would have had the same results. God would have been faithful to them. What they were eating instead of isn't the important part. What's important is that God honored their faithfulness and lifted them up.
Why did Daniel say, hey, include my 3 friends here too? Why not just me?
Yeah, and we wonder why it's those 3 that get grouped together, but those 3 get grouped together in the whole time. And sometimes we'll only see 3 of them, and sometimes we'll only see Daniel, and you're wondering, well, where's the other ones? Why it goes back and forth. And why just this group when you had a bunch that were taken, thousands that were taken? You know?
They might have been the smartest ones out of the group.
Well, they rise to the top, yeah, and they get the prominent positions, as we'll see later here in the next thing. But the big focus here is the faithfulness to God, and then God answering that faithfulness and lifting them up. Not what they ate or didn't eat.
Pastor,
Yeah.
okay, they were to train for 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But then they put it to the test for 10 days. So they actually ate that way for 3 years or just 10 days?
Well, you see this, yeah, this gets questioned, yeah. You know,
So he's not
when
gonna
it says,
use it.
in here, the reading is, please test your servants for 10 days, so it seems as a test for just 10 days.
Mhm. Yeah, but
But
on
the
verse
training
5,
is, yeah,
on verse 5, it says the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine. They were to be trained.
Right.
for 3 years
Mm-hmm.
before they enter the
So does the
service.
training go on for 3 years after this 10-day test? I think is what she wants.
Yeah, and that we don't
This is
know, it
just-
can be
this is like
interpreted
just the
either,
start of
it can be
training.
interpreted either way, it can be interpreted also, Daniel comes there, they begin getting trained, and then he finally comes to the point of realizing where this food's coming from, what's going on, and so then you have verse 8 there, I resolve not to.
So that 10 days is just somewhere in that 3 years of training.
Right.
Turn this off.
Okay. Well, there you go, we're done for the evening.
Some time to spare. What's going on?
There you go.
You jipping us or
I will, yeah. All right, thanks for joining us, Linda and Chris,
You're still confused?
appreciate it.
So either it could have, if the. that
And
10-day
Gail
test
and
could have
Adam,
been
thanks for
beginning,
joining
in the
us.
middle, somewhere when he
Bye-bye.
decided the food was.
Yeah, but then they could continue eating that way for the 3 years.
Yeah, the steward of the chef, let them do it for 3 years.